Everyone at the dinner table laughed when Brad announced he'd finally learned how to reverse park the family truck. Their father, Frank, gave him a playful punch on the shoulder and raised his glass, toasting his real son. No one noticed Liam sitting silently at the end of the table, pushing peas across his plate. No one ever did. From the moment Liam could remember, his home in small-town Ohio had a clear hierarchy. Brad was the pride, Frank's carbon copy. Born to carry the legacy of Frank Ironworks, a company built on grit, tradition, and decades of sweat. Liam, on the other hand, preferred sketchbooks over spanners, colors over contracts. He loved watching how sunlight bounced off rusted steel, how shapes bent and flowed in digital renderings. But to Frank, that wasn't real work. That was nonsense. When Liam turned 16, he did the bravest thing he'd ever done. He told the truth. He stood in the middle of the living room, palms trembling, voice shaking, and said he was gay. His mother dropped a bowl. Brad turned pale, but it was Frank's response that changed everything. He didn't yell. He didn't throw fists or slurs. He simply looked around the room and said, "I'm proud of all my children except that one." And then he walked out. From that day on, Liam became a ghost in his own home. Holiday dinners had a new seating arrangement, one chair subtly missing. Group photos angled so he was out of frame. Conversations about the future skipped over his name entirely. Brad was brought into board meetings, taught the ropes of the family business, handed keys and trust and respect. Liam was handed silence, yet nothing stung more than the subtle, constant removal. The way his ideas were ignored, his presence treated like background noise. The one time he tried showing Frank a small app he built to help manage warehouse inventory, the older man didn't even look up. "We don't need that fancy stuff," Frank said. "We need real men doing real work." At school, Liam was quiet but sharp. He excelled in math and design, found solace in after-school computer labs and online forums, where he could be anyone, speak freely, and not be the wrong son. He kept a running list of scholarship deadlines and university applications in a notebook hidden beneath his bed. He had a plan, and it didn't involve begging for a seat at a table that never wanted him. When senior year came to a close, Liam packed a duffel bag with secondhand clothes, his laptop, and $3,000 he had saved from tutoring and summer gigs. No goodbye party, no teary hugs. Frank was in the backyard fixing the shed. Brad was off somewhere giving a talk to the junior staff. His mother only whispered, "Don't forget to call sometimes," before quickly retreating into the kitchen. Liam walked out of that house knowing exactly who he wasn't. He wasn't the golden son. He wasn't the heir. He wasn't wanted. But beneath the ache, something colder burned, a quiet, focused fire that whispered, "You don't need their pride. You will build something they'll never see coming." As the bus rolled out of town toward New York, Liam didn't look back. He looked forward, he looked through, because some stories don't start with applause. Some start with rejection and become unforgettable. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, this story is for you. Stay with us to see how Liam turned silence into power and changed everything. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more true stories that speak to the soul. New York wasn't kind, but at least it was indifferent. Liam arrived in the city with no safety net, no apartment lease, and a weathered MacBook that overheated if he opened too many tabs. He rented a corner in a shared studio with two strangers who didn't ask questions and didn't care about his past. That suited him just fine. He needed anonymity, not affection. Silence, after all, was something he had already learned to survive in. During the day, Liam took classes in computer science at a city college, surviving on scholarships and instant noodles. At night, he scoured freelance forums, taking odd jobs in web design, app debugging, warehouse software, anything that paid. Sometimes the work was dull, sometimes humiliating, like fixing outdated code for companies that never bothered to learn his name. But each project was a puzzle, and Liam had always loved puzzles. Every broken function, every messy database, every impossible request, it all became fuel. In between work and class, he sketched, not with pencils anymore, but with code. He had an idea. A smarter modular logistics tool, something lean, intuitive, designed not for tech giants, but for the mom and pop suppliers. The warehouses like the ones his father dealt with, just without the iron fists and outdated filing cabinets. He called it Ferron, a private joke. In metallurgy, ferronickel is used to make stronger steel. Liam had always believed strength came not from what people saw on the surface, but from what was built quietly within. For years, Ferron lived only on his laptop. When he wasn't freelancing or studying, Liam refined it, building a prototype, testing features, reworking user experience. He spoke to small business owners in shipping districts, listened to their frustrations, watched how their systems broke down. Then he made Ferran better. It started small, an online community for warehouse managers passed around his demo like a secret. Then a blog mentioned it. Then a regional shipping company asked to try it for a month. Liam said yes and stayed up 3 nights straight, fixing bugs. When they offered him a consulting fee, he said no. He wanted feedback, not favors. He needed Ferran to work, and it did. Within a year, Ferran had been adopted by over a dozen independent supply companies across the Northeast. Word spread Liam still operating under his LLC. F. Reynolds Solutions watched silently from behind his screen. Not once did he put his face or full name on anything. The more Ferran grew, the more he receded. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. Because one day a small Pennsylvania supplier signed up for a premium Ferran license. Liam recognized the name instantly. Sutter Steel Transport, a legacy provider deeply tied into the supply chain of Frank Ironworks. He didn't panic. He documented everything. Terms of use, custom APIs, shipping dependencies. 3 months in Sutter was saving money, moving faster, and quietly replacing the outdated vendor Frank still relied on. Liam studied the network like a surgeon. He mapped out which materials came from where, who handled which routes, who owned what percentage of which service. He noted which contracts were up for renewal. Then he approached an angel investor, not with a sob story or a pitch deck, but with proof. Charts, data, growth curves, contracts. By the time he was 26, Liam was the majority stakeholder in 3 logistics hubs feeding into the Midwest manufacturing belt. All of them had contracts with Frank Ironworks. None of them knew their silent partner used to sit alone at Christmas. But Liam didn't celebrate, he worked. Every move he made, every quiet acquisition, every calculated pivot had one purpose: control, not for revenge, not yet. He knew the Frank Ironworks board would never willingly sell to a stranger without legacy. But Frank was bleeding cash. Brad, who'd been groomed to lead, had no head for numbers and even less for innovation. Clients were pulling out. Regulations were tightening. Rumors of bankruptcy loomed. So Liam offered a lifeline. Through a shell company registered in Delaware, he proposed a buyout, full acquisition with brand rights, protected and current leadership retained for cultural continuity. It was everything they wanted to hear, everything Liam had prepared for. He didn't sign the final documents himself. He had someone deliver them, then he waited. Waited for the right moment. Waited for the anniversary. Waited for the night his father would stand on stage in front of the town to celebrate a century of family excellence. Waited for the stage to be his. The invitation arrived in a thick white envelope, gold embossed with a family crest Liam hadn't seen in over a decade. Frank Ironworks Centennial Gala, celebrating 100 years of legacy. It was addressed formally to Mr. L. Reynolds, the legal name Liam had adopted when he registered his first LLC. No mention of Liam, no sign that anyone realized who he was, but he knew. He knew everything. For months leading up to the gala, Liam had been orchestrating the final pieces of the takeover. The deal was already done, contracts signed and funds transferred. But no one on the board, least of all, Frank, understood who was behind the purchase. The shell company had a neutral name. The lawyers were discreet, and Brad, ever too arrogant, had rubber-stamped the final terms without reading the fine print. All he saw was a chance to exit gracefully from a sinking ship cushioned with a 7-figure golden parachute. He didn't care who was behind it. He assumed some New York firm was expanding westward. Liam had timed it to perfection. He made sure the gala would take place after the final clearance went through, but before the public announcement of the acquisition. That way the company would still believe it belonged to Frank, still believe the family name meant something, still celebrate with pride until it was time to introduce the new owner. But beneath the precision, there was something raw gnawing inside Liam. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want revenge for the sake of spectacle. He wanted truth. He wanted Frank to see what he'd spent 10 years refusing to see, that the son he erased, the one he dismissed without raising his voice, had outgrown every single wall built to hold him back. The night of the gala. Liam arrived early. The venue was a renovated warehouse, one of the very first buildings Frank had converted into a steel facility back in the 70s. It had been repurposed into an elegant event hall, complete with string lights, exposed beams, and photo exhibits chronicling the company's history. Liam walked past pictures of Frank shaking hands with mayors, cutting ribbons, posing beside molten steel. There were no photos of him, Not even as a child, Brad was already mingling, surrounded by young investors and local politicians. Frank, in his signature charcoal suit, stood near the stage, smiling like a man convinced the story was his. No one noticed Liam. Not yet. The speeches began with familiar faces, executives, clients, retired workers. They spoke of grit, tradition. Ohio pride. Frank was called to the stage with thunderous applause. He talked about hard work, about family values, about passing torches. He talked about Brad, how proud he was of his firstborn, his natural successor. Then came the scheduled surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, tonight we're honored to welcome the new majority owner of Frank Ironworks, who will now say a few words. Whispers buzzed through the room. Frank froze mid-step. Brad frowned. There was no mention of this in the program. Then, Liam walked forward. Black tailored suit, crisp white shirt, a small rainbow enamel pin on his lapel. At first, no one registered him. Then gasps. A few people clapped out of confusion more than respect. Frank's face didn't change, just drained as if the color had been pulled from him. He didn't say a word, and he didn't move. Liam took the mic. I know. Many of you don't recognize me, he began. And that's all right. I wasn't invited here because of my last name. I was invited because, as of last week, this company no longer belongs to the Frank family. The room shifted. Heads turned, champagne glasses paused midair. I'm the founder of the company that acquired Frank Ironworks. And 10 years ago, I walked out of a house where I was told very clearly that I would never be part of this family's future, that I would never be enough, that I was a failure. He let the word hang, not bitter, just real. And I believed it until I stopped waiting for someone else to see my worth. I stopped asking for a seat at a table where silence was louder than hate. I built my own. And tonight I come not to humiliate, not to retaliate, but to honor what I created in the absence of approval. Liam held up the signed transfer documents. The logo of Frank Ironworks gleamed beside his own. This company is mine now. Not through bloodline, but through vision. Not through legacy, but through effort. I didn't inherit it, I earned it. He turned slightly, letting his eyes meet Frank's across the room. And I want you to know I'm not here to ask for pride. I'm here because I am proud of who I became in spite of who you tried to erase. The silence afterward was thicker than any applause. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or stare. Frank remained still. Brad looked like he wanted to leave, but didn't know how. Liam didn't stay long after that. He walked out into the night air, crisp heart, calm, not because he'd won, but because he no longer needed to. He had never been the failure. He had simply been underestimated. The moment Liam stepped off the stage, he didn't glance back. Applause came tentative at first, then full-bodied, though not everyone clapped. Some were moved by the quiet defiance, others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to process what had just happened. But Liam hadn't come for their validation. He hadn't come for applause, he came for that stillness as he saw in Frank's eyes. When the truth finally settled in, for a man who once ran an empire of iron. Frank looked oddly breakable that night. The rest of the gala unraveled in confusion. Guests murmured, staff whispered, and somewhere in the crowd, Brad slipped out early. No final toast, no proud family send-off. The name Frank Ironworks was still on the banners, but now it belonged to someone else. Liam left before dessert. Coat button documents returned to his briefcase. He didn't want to bask. He wanted closure. The next day, the press got wind. Industry headlines screamed, family-owned steel giant changes hands after 100 years. No photo accompanied the articles. Liam made sure of that. He declined interviews, refused panels, let the facts speak. Frank Ironworks had been acquired by Front Systems LLC. The new leadership preferred modernization, sustainability, and inclusive hiring. It was a clean narrative, no need for names, but in the town, names mattered. And word spread fast that the forgotten son had returned not in bitterness, but in brilliance. Some called it poetic justice, others called it pride under disguise. Either way, no one looked at Liam the same again, especially not Frank. A week later, Liam returned, not to the company headquarters, not to the boardroom. He drove out to the family house on the edge of town. The paint was peeling in places. The mailbox still had the same dent he had accidentally made as a kid. He parked across the street and just sat for a moment, watching the light in the living room flicker through thin curtains. He hadn't seen that house in years, and yet every corner still lived inside him. The hallway where he'd once hidden report cards. The kitchen where Frank had once said, "You'll never make it without this family." the garage where Brad first learned to drive, and the front porch where Liam at 16 had stood under a gray sky trying to find the words to say, "I'm gay," only to hear his father say in a voice colder than the rain, "Not in this house." Now he sat in silence, holding an envelope in his hand. Inside, a copy of the final sale agreement, notarized and signed by every board member, a symbol of everything he had built without help, without inheritance, without permission. He didn't knock, he didn't want to. Instead, he crossed the street, opened the rusted mailbox, and slid the envelope in. Frank would find it. Eventually, the next morning at the office, Liam walked into the conference room. His conference room where department heads had gathered. Some looked nervous, others hopeful, all uncertain. He took his seat at the head of the table, clicked the remote, and brought up a slide that read simply, "Transformation begins here." "This isn't going to be a company that runs on fear anymore," he said. "It's going to run on people, real people who've been overlooked, who've been silenced, who've been told they weren't enough." No one said a word, but he could feel the shift. It wasn't just leadership, it was direction. In the weeks that followed, Liam enacted policies that his father would have called soft. He doubled maternity leave, introduced gender-neutral restrooms, promoted 3 women and 1 openly gay engineer into senior leadership. He partnered with local LGBTQ centers for outreach programs and mentorship. But the most surprising change came when he visited the factory floor. Old-timers expected a figurehead, CEO, cold distant. But Liam walked the aisles, shook hands, listened. He remembered names, remembered the way his father used to speak to workers like machines, not people. One afternoon, a longtime employee named Carl Bearded, hard-worn, the kind of man Frank once trusted, blindly approached him. Hesitant, "I knew your father," Carl said quietly, "worked under him for 30 years. He thought this place couldn't run without him." Liam nodded. Carl continued, voice rough, "But maybe it needed to run without him to become something better." Liam didn't reply, just nodded again, because he knew Carl wasn't really talking about the company. He was talking about him. That night, as Liam left the office, he paused at the glass doors, looking at the name stenciled in chrome above the entrance. Frank Ironworks, a Farron company. He hadn't changed it, not yet. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about redefining it. Because even steel can be melted down and reforged. Stronger, sharper, and unrecognizable from what it once was. The day Liam was offered a feature in Forbes Under 35, he didn't call anyone, not his team, not his old professors, not even the quiet friend from college who once lent him $50 when rent was due. Instead, he opened a document on his laptop titled simply Final Policies. Equity Draft. It was something he'd been working on long before the buyout. A blueprint not just for a company, but for a new kind of culture. One that didn't tolerate people like him out of necessity, but welcomed them out of principle. Frank never reached out. Not after the gala, not after the mail, not after the news broke. And Liam never went back to the house. He didn't need to. He'd left a truth there heavy enough to haunt without another word. But the silence didn't mean Liam had forgotten. In truth, he remembered everything. He remembered how on his 12th birthday, his father gave Brad a new bike and gave him a handshake. How, when he won a state design competition, Frank shrugged and said, "You'll never get paid to draw lines." How he once overheard his father at a barbecue say that when he's soft, he'll end up living off his brother. And he remembered that final moment in the rain, the way Frank didn't yell when Liam said he was gay. He just turned off the porch light and closed the door. But now Liam was the one building lights. He no longer carried those memories like wounds, he carried them like blueprints. Under his leadership, Frank Ironworks transformed into more than a manufacturing business. It became a symbol. One of the oldest steel companies in Ohio was now led by a gay man who didn't just come out but stood up. He established a fund for LGBTQ+ youth in trades, launched internships for formerly incarcerated individuals, and mandated DEI training across every department, not as a box to tick, but as a mirror to hold. Still, not everyone cheered. Some old investors pulled out. Some blogs called him a woke executive, trying to fix what wasn't broken. But Liam knew it had been broken for a long time, just not on paper. It had been broken the day it became a place where people had to hide who they were to keep a paycheck. And maybe the past couldn't be fixed, but the future that could be redesigned. One day a letter arrived, not in a gold envelope, not typed, just a plain white sheet, shaky handwriting. "I saw the article, you've done well. I didn't see it before, I see it now." No signature, but Liam knew the hand. He didn't reply. He took the letter and pinned it inside a drawer beside the first sketch he ever made of Farron on a paper napkin. Because he didn't need to write back. He had already answered in full in public and on a stage his father thought would always belong to him. Liam stayed in Ohio longer than he planned. At first, it was to oversee transitions, but soon he started attending community panels supporting local initiatives. People began to recognize him, not just as the man who bought the company, but as someone who had changed it. Former employees stopped him at diners. Teenagers who once thought they'd have to leave town to live honestly sent him emails quietly thanking him for proving they could stay. One afternoon as he was leaving a meeting, the young intern named Marcus caught up to him breathless. "Sir, I mean Liam, I just wanted to say I used to think I had to choose between being out and being successful. But then I saw you," Liam smiled. He didn't say thank you, he said, "Then don't waste time choosing. Just build what they said you couldn't." That night, Liam stood once more in front of the old family home, not to visit, not to confront, just to see it one last time. The porch light was on, but he didn't walk up. He turned away, stepped back into his car and whispered to himself, "I didn't need your light. I became my own." And with that, he drove off toward a future he had designed with nothing but silence, defiance, and relentless love for the boy they had tried to forget. But the world would never forget because some names are carved in stone. Others like his are written in steel. Have you ever been told you'd never succeed just because of who you are? What would you say to the people who tried to write you off? Share your truth in the comments. We read every word. For more real stories of resilience, love, and quiet revolution, subscribe to Heart Stories because your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to keep going.